Apologies. I've received apologies from Jim Wells, and no other apologies has been received. Has notice been received from any other member to delegate authority to another member of the committee to vote under temporary standing orders? No. Any declarations of interest? Any members declare any interests? Nope. Moving on to the next item, the chairperson's business. Last week we had the interim permanent secretary came and talked to the committee about the RHI report, and there were a couple of actions out of that and sort of the requirement from the departmental response. As members will recall, at last week's meeting, officials provided a most unsatisfactory briefing in respect to the RHI disciplinary process. And to be honest, I still don't know why it was proposed that it would have been held in closed session. I still haven't had a satisfactory answer to that. There was a notable absence of detail both in terms of the individuals involved and, most surprisingly, the processes underpinning the relevant decision-making process. It seems that the panels who made the decisions are now defunct, and so we can't question them either. The officials couldn't tell the committee who had been disciplined and couldn't confirm whether retraining had been provided for other staff. Most startling of all, despite the critical importance of the poor handover in the RHI debacle and the considerable passage of time, officials seem to indicate that handover procedures had only recently become mandatory. I think that was quite when Jill made that comment, I must admit that did indeed surprise me. Members were quite forthright last week and have already agreed to write to the Minister regarding his legal advice and to the Department seeking a lot of the other information on this subject. And I think we can do that as well. In recent correspondence at page 253 of your packs, the Department refers to RHI Lessons Learned review papers. Are members content to write to the Department and seek sight of these RHI papers? I think we would be. Agreed? Agreed? Okay.
Jim wants to come in there.
Sorry, go ahead, Jim.
Sure. I must say, the more I thought about last week's evidence, the more disturbed I am about the even the mentality and the approach to the whole outfall from RHI. And we're left with a lot of unanswered questions. I was particularly struck by the fact that there was an external and an internal panel who seemed to sift these issues and make recommendations. Now, I would have thought that though we have to be mindful of data issues, data protection issues of individuals, I would have thought their reports and documentation are something that this committee could legitimately ask to see, to just let us get a feel for how this was set about and how thorough it was. So I was going to suggest that they would expect, no doubt, some redactions in what would be given, that we should ask explicitly for the documentation touching upon the work of the panels. Because I'd just like to see how thorough and convincing that work was. And I think we have the right to ask for such documents. Remind you of what Section 11 of the Functional Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act said. Yeah. That we can ask for documents. So I would like to expressly to ask for that in writing if the committee was agreeable.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jim. The other thing that I was struck as well, sort of reviewing last week, is that there seems to be a process that's gone on here where we've had no real oversight to, even though it did result in the Assembly being down for 3 years, and a considerable amount of disquiet amongst the population of Northern Ireland about how this place is run and managed. Now, one of the things I would like to have seen were what were the terms of reference for the external and internal review panel. And that won't be specifically naming any particular sort of individuals. So there should be no reason why we shouldn't be able to see the external and internal terms of reference for those that sifting process that went through as well. So I'm minded a committee to ask whether we can have access and would like to see the terms of reference for the external and internal panel. And I would also, as Jim has pointed out, about asking for the sort of the explicit documentation and the sort of the questions that came out from that as well. Now, I don't have any problem with it being redacted with names removed from it, but I would like to see the sort of questions and what I would call lessons identified that's come from it, because I think we should see those as well as the information requests that we've already asked for. And I think that would be appropriate, bearing in mind we're due to see we're asking to see the Minister again soon, but also we're the Head of Civil Service in November. So I think it would be appropriate if we had that documentation by then, so we could actually review it, so we can see what changes have been made, if any, and what we are doing about ensuring that the kind of things that happened about RHI don't happen again. If we were content.
Yep.
Content? Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda, item 4.2, multi-year budget. The Westminster spending review is set to complete by the end of October 2021. A 3-year budget settlement is expected, covering 22-23 to 24-25. It's anticipated that the Executive will then come up with a draft budget, which will be subject to public consultation. It's a while since we had the Minister who's come and had a chat with the committee, and I think it would be quite useful if we had the opportunity for the Minister to come and brief the committee on the multi-year budget consultation, but also some of the other issues that are in his in-tray as well. And one of the things that is worrying me is that we're heading to potentially another impasse here in the Assembly and the Executive, but I would like to have the Minister to come and talk to us, so it gives a good opportunity so we can talk through where we are in the budget process and some of the other significant issues that we have as well, if we were content to do that. And that would be early November, I would imagine that would be the case, if we were content.
Yep.
Content? Thank you. Next item on the agenda, draft minutes of proceedings. The draft minutes of the Finance Committee meeting on the 29th of September are at page 38. Are members content with the draft minutes? Agreed. And there are no matters arising. It's agreed. Move on to the next item of the agenda is the NICS Injury Benefit Scheme. The committee will now receive an oral and written briefing from the Department updating on the consultation of the NICS Injury Benefit Scheme. And we should have Colette, Margaret and Falola, do we?
Yeah, all there.
Excellent. Team, we've got the briefing paper is at page 49. Previous departmental papers in the consultation at page 54. A copy of the current scheme rules are at page 120. And a departmental update paper that's in tabled items. Colette, are you speaking for this, are you?
I am, yes.
Yeah, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for this opportunity to brief you on the Department's proposals to make changes to the Northern Ireland Civil Service Injury Benefits Scheme. By way of introduction, my name is Colette Heaney. I am currently Acting Director of Pensions Division following Grace Nesbitt's retirement. I am joined today by Margaret Coyle and Fionnuala Harkin from Civil Service Pensions Policy and Legislation Branch. Details of the consultation of the Injury Benefit Scheme were shared with the committee on the 20th of May, and it was considered in its session on the 26th of May in advance of its launch on the 7th of June. Consultation closed on the 10th of September, and a total of 94 responses were received. In advance of today's briefing, the committee will have received a short summary of some of the responses to the consultation. Hopefully, this has given you a flavour of the feedback and comments received from members of the trade unions. It might be helpful if I provide a brief background to the Civil Service Injury Benefit Scheme.
Yes, please.
The scheme makes provision to pay injury benefits to employees of the Northern Ireland Civil Service or organisations covered by the Northern Ireland Civil Service terms and conditions. Those who have suffered an impairment to earnings as a result of an injury that has been sustained due to their duties or employment. The scheme makes provision for temporary and permanent injury awards. Temporary awards top up salary when an employee who has sustained a qualifying injury has had their salary reduced. For example, they may have moved to reduced level of sick pay or pension rate of pay due to sickness absence. Permanent injury awards become payable when a qualifying injury means the employee can no longer carry out their duties that they were employed to do, and in the majority of these cases, the employee will have to leave work, resulting in a reduction in earnings. There are varying degrees to which earnings capacity can be impaired, but the maximum payable under the scheme is 85% pensionable earnings. Injury benefits are paid on a no-fault basis. This means that an injury award may still be payable even if there's no negligence on the part of the employer. However, if there's a negligence on the employee's part, then no award is made. Employees can only receive recompense once for an injury. Therefore, any damages or compensation received in respect of the injury relating to loss of earnings will be offset against any injury benefits payable or compensation paid. Benefits such as sickness benefit, incapacity benefit, ESA will also be offset against any injury benefit payable. Pensions and payment from any occupational pension payable out of public funds are also offset. I also understand that payments made under the Troubles Permanent Disablement Payment Scheme will take any civil service injury benefit award into account and reduce victims' payments accordingly, so that applicants are not, in effect, paid twice for the same injury. In summary, injury benefit is paid when a qualifying injury impairs earnings capacity, and that injury is attributable to the nature of the employee's duties. And why is there a need to change? From its inception, the scheme has evolved a lot and has moved from being very restrictive to becoming fairly broad and very much open to interpretation. As a result, the nature of the injuries sustained has substantially shifted from those of a physical nature, for which the scheme was initially designed, to more psychological or mental health related injuries. A review of the injury pension scheme was on civil service pensions schedule of work, and some preparatory work had been undertaken. The Northern Ireland Audit Office's report, published on the 10th of March in 2020 on the injury on duty schemes for officers in the PSNI and the Northern Ireland Prison Service, or review. The committee will recall that the report found that injury benefit schemes for the Police Service for Northern Ireland and the Northern Ireland Prison Scheme, who fall under the Civil Service Injury Benefit Scheme, were not fit for purpose, and significant change were required to make the schemes efficient, affordable and sustainable. I'll now just provide a summary of costs which will be particularly relevant to the committee. For all injury awards made from the 1st of April 2006 onwards, the benefits payable under the scheme are recharged to departments or employers, which is a direct cost to the Northern Ireland bloc. During 2020 to 21, employers were recharged a total of 3.9 million, covering 301 NICS injury awards. Costs have almost trebled since 2015-16. This is not sustainable for employers, and costs will continue to spiral. In addition to this, payments in respect of injury benefits that were awarded prior to the 1st of April 2006 continue to be met by civil service pensions. And for 2021, this totaled 2.6 million, covering 247 awards. The total spend for 2020-21 is almost 6.5 million on injury benefits. Of the total 548 recipients of injury benefit, the majority, 387, are former employees of the Northern Ireland Prison Service. There are other reasons for the need to review the injury benefit scheme in addition to spiralling costs. The scheme rules have not been amended since 2005. They do not take account of the introduction of NUVA's pension scheme that came into operation in 2007, or the new reform pension scheme known as Alpha, introduced in 2015. Also, rules set the legal ambiguity around the injury benefit process is used as an alternative or complementary to a complaints or grievance process. This should not be the case. However, as there is no burden of proof from the applicant, and the pensions ombudsman view is that under the rules as they stand, an applicant can perceive that they have been injured mentally, even if the employer disputes the case and has evidence that they have made every effort to make reasonable adjustments to accommodate the employee or mediate where there has simply been a clash of personalities. These are total different scenarios from those who have suffered genuine or severe mental trauma associated with their duties. For example, prison officers. It is important that this review ensures that benefits are awarded to those the injury benefit scheme was designed to support. So just some information around the consultation. During 2020, a working group comprising representatives from Civil Service Pensions, Department of Justice and the Departmental Solicitor's Office was established to conduct a thorough review of the Civil Service Injury Benefit Scheme and make recommendations for change. A similar group was set up to review the Policing Injury Benefit Scheme, and I understand their proposals for change will be forthcoming at a later stage. Similarly, as the Injury Benefit Scheme is analogous to the rules of the Civil Service Injury Benefit Scheme in GB, officials in Cabinet Office have been apprised of developments, as it is their intention to reform their scheme in due course. The outcome of the Civil Service Pensions Working Group led us to consulting on 8 key change proposals to the Injury Benefit Scheme. The proposals seek to address the importance of balancing the cost to the public purse, while also providing support to those who continue to require it. The proposals are also designed to respond to the recommendations in the Northern Ireland Audit Office report. As outlined in your briefing paper, the key change proposals contained in the consultation are: remove the link to the pension scheme. The Department considers that there is no rationale for the Injury Benefit Scheme to remain linked to the pension schemes, and in fact, you do not need to be a member of the pension schemes to qualify for an injury award. Removing this link will simplify the administration process and make calculations easier and quicker to do, as they will be based on basic pay rather than pensionable earnings as defined in each section. It will also address the changes required to incorporate Novus and Alpha. The second change proposal is define injury and injury on duty. The Department considers that clarity is needed around key terms and existing rules. There is ambiguity around what is a qualifying injury, as the current rules are vague and open to varying interpretation, as I have alluded to. Third is eligibility for those who have left. The Department considers that if an individual has already left the NICS with full retirement benefits, they have evidently not experienced an injury-related loss of earnings, so should have no entitlement to injury benefits. Injury benefits should be considered for applicants who leave with reduced benefits within set timeframes from the date of leaving. Fourthly, time limits for retrospective claims. The Department accepts that time limits must be introduced for retrospective applications and that the status quo of no time restrictions cannot continue. Retrospective claims and backdating causes substantial arrears payments with no control mechanism in place. The retrospective element is the main contributing factor for the high spend. There have been instances of claims being backdated and arrears paid covering 20 years or more. Time limits are imposed by other organisations paying benefits from public money. For example, the award of welfare benefits have time limits ranging from only applying from the date of receipt of the application up to 3 months and up to 3 months retrospection, regardless of the category of the injury or how long it took for the injury to manifest or be diagnosed. The Department, however, does recognise that in some circumstances it can take a protracted period of time for some injuries to manifest. for example, PTSD, asbestos, and we intend to continue to accept applications in these circumstances. Only the date to backdate the award is being considered. Fifth is lump sum payment. The scheme makes awards in respect of loss of earnings capacity and is designed to bring the beneficiary's income from specified sources up to a guaranteed level. If a lump sum is paid in addition to a monthly top-up amount, this may bring the income above this level. The injury benefit scheme was initially modelled on the classic pension scheme, but lump sums are no longer a feature of the reformed pension schemes. The removal of the link with the pension schemes, recommendation 1, should also help with the concept that no lump sum will be payable. Sixth is offsetting. Injury benefit top-ups are designed to keep income at a guaranteed level. The current system can offset any payments from public funds and compensation payments that provide for loss of earnings in relation to a qualifying injury. However, some claimants have since become re-employed, which is good news in terms of recovery, but means that their earnings capacity has changed and their income is above the guaranteed level. The Department considers it would be reasonable to offset income from other sources to maintain the appropriate guaranteed level. Seventh is a review mechanism. At present, there is no review mechanism for injury benefits. The Department considers that it is necessary to address both new and existing claims. The Department will, however, take into consideration the various responses provided to the consultation prior to making any change to existing awards. The Department feels it is reasonable to revisit cases where a member in receipt of an injury is re-employed or the cessation of a welfare benefit, which would indicate that circumstances have changed. And the eighth is duration of awards. The Department considers that the payment of an injury benefit award for life, which is a current practice, is unsustainable. For life awards are not always equitable, as someone at pension age with an injury award could not earn more than someone with a retirement pension. Injury benefits are designed to top up earnings where there is a loss of earnings capacity due to a work-related injury. The Department considers a fairer system may be to cease or at least adjust the award payment at state pension age. With there being no normal expectation to earn a salary past state pension age, this action would be fair in ensuring a recipient of an injury award is no better off than someone who retired at normal retirement age with full pension. At present, only 1.5% of the NICS employees are aged over 60, and this decreases to 0.3% being aged 70 or over. So few civil servants work past state pension age. Each of the proposals, if adopted, will only be implemented for new applications received, with the exception of the possibility of the review mechanism being introduced for existing awards as well as new claims. It is anticipated the introduction of these proposals will result in significant savings to employers going forward. It will also lead to improved cost controls and minimise the escalating costs for future liabilities, which is critical given the quantum of costs involved. None of the changes proposed deviate from the aim of the scheme, which is to provide a guaranteed level of income to employees who lost the capacity to earn as a consequence of a qualifying injury, a disease or death which can be directly related to their employment. I hope this has given you a flavour of the context of the consultation, and I know you will be eager to know what our next steps will be in processing these proposed changes. Officials and our departmental legal advisors are currently evaluating the 94 responses received, some of which are quite detailed and contain reports and varying sources of information. So officials want to spend time to properly and thoroughly review, analyse and assess before making final recommendations. Any changes to be implemented will have ministerial approval and be shared with the committee. I can say at this stage that responses from former employees currently in receipt of injury benefits tend to oppose changes to the scheme for existing recipients, but the majority of responders accept the proposals around the introduction of the review mechanism for new applications. The trade unions, NIPSA, Unite, FDA, GMB, POA, and the Community Trade Union Scotland and Northern Ireland also submitted a variety of views which will be carefully evaluated. I think it is important to emphasise that the Department recognises the need to support employees who have suffered severe mental health issues and those who develop conditions such as PTSD as a result of experiencing trauma on duty or in relation to their duties and have no plans to exclude eligibility for such injuries. An early emergent theme from the responses received is a need to address the reasons a large number of prison officers experience injuries on duty and the provision of ongoing adequate support, particularly for those who have left service due to a qualifying injury. It is our intention to share the relevant feedback with the Department of Justice and NICSHR colleagues for the consideration. A few responses referred to non-compliance with Section 75. I can confirm that the Department is committed to its ongoing duty to comply with Section 75 of the Northern Ireland Act and regards the screening process as an ongoing and important part of that compliance. The consultation has allowed us to carry out a further screening process focusing on the issues raised.
Colette,
we will report on the outcome.
Colette.
Sorry, just finished now. I'm just nearly finished.
Sorry, I'm the chair. I'm just asking a question.
Sorry.
Section 75, you said something about non-compliance with Section 75. Where was the
Yes.
non-compliance with Section 75?
I think it's relating to age and disability, that they feel that we hadn't screened it properly, but at the time, based on what we knew, we did. And we're just going to then take cognizance of what they have said in their responses.
Okay. And who raised that issue?
I am not sure at the present time which particular person or body that raised that.
Okay. Now, could you find that out for us, please?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. Thank you. Just continue.
Okay. Sorry. The consultation has allowed us to carry out a further screening process focusing on the issues raised. We will report on the outcome of the latest screening when available. In the meantime, the position remains that these are only proposals and all comments and responses are being carefully evaluated before a response is published, which will provide final details of the approach to be adopted. And that is the end of the brief, and myself and my colleagues are happy to take questions or comments from members.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, my apologies, team. I didn't make a declaration of interest. I am a member of Unite, the union, and of course Unite was mentioned as this, but I have no knowledge of any consultation that Unite put into this as well. Colette, thanks very much indeed for your presentation. Just a question. When we're talking about time limits for retrospective claims, and I noticed you were very careful about talking about, particularly about issues with PTSD, which is, quite rightly so. But is there any indication that you're looking at a time limit for PTSD, or is there any indications at all that that's accepted as that can manifest itself many, many years afterwards, indeed even decades after the trauma occurred?
That's accepted that it will manifest after a number of years. The issue that then we face is how far do we date it back? Do we date it back to when the injury occurred? Do we just date it back for a short period of time when it was diagnosed, when they made the application? That is what we're looking at. We're not debarring them from making an application a number of years later.
Sorry, you said a number of years later. I just
No,
want to get
it could take 10 years, 20 years to manifest.
Right. Okay. So it could be at any stage after they've left the service, is what you're saying, up to the age
Yes.
of pension age, if I understand you correctly.
We haven't looked beyond pension age yet.
Right. Okay. Okay, dokes. And I remember when you put out the initial sort of paper, which raised quite a few concerns within this committee, is when it was about claims including PTSD. There was up to 3 months, so I take it that's been completely removed.
Sorry, I don't understand the question. That's...
Sorry, originally when the consultation came through and paperwork came through to us, one of the reasons why the committee was concerned, there was an issue about PTSD, and it said it had to be you had to notify that within 3 months. And obviously, anybody who knows anything about PTSD knows that you can't have it within a 3-month time limit, and that raised considerable concerns. I just want your assurance that has been completely removed from the process.
That the fact that we will accept PTSD applicants when the condition manifests and they're in a condition that they can apply, we will accept those applications. The only difference is that we will probably not backdate it right back to when the injury may arise.
Why is that?
That is where the high cost comes in and the high spend. A department has been and received their allocation for a budget at the start of the year, and we have claims which are over £20,000 in that year. It could sort of have major impact on a department's budget to meet the cost for those arrears.
Yeah, I can see that, but if there has been somebody who has suffered from PTSD from, let's say, when they were a prison officer, maybe 10 to 15 years ago, and obviously that has impacted on their ability to either continue their job or subsequent employment to do that as well. I can't see why.
If they've remained in employment, then they probably haven't suffered any detrimental to their earnings capacity. It is only when there's an identification that there is a detriment to their earnings capacity. Okay,
so I can already, again, without prejudice, because I'm dealing with some issues as an MLA with people who have served in the prison service, who have been in a situation where they haven't been able to maintain a job at the same level or same level of salary when they've come out of the prison service. Indeed, for the sort of the anguish that they may have suffered during that particular period of time. So they would be compensated up to the level of the salary they could reasonably expect, or 80% of the salary they reasonably expect during their service in the prison service, if I read you correct.
From when we apply we still haven't agreed on what the backdated period would be. We have engaged with other organisations who provide similar types of benefits, and they would not go back 20 years.
Well, I think I'm only speaking personally here as the chair of this committee, but I will be looking at very closely about when the sort of the compensation comes from, and I will look to make sure it is from when it actually occurred. It doesn't matter if it's 5 years or 20 years for people who deal with PTSD and those issues, but that's something I have an issue and concern with. But thank you for that. Keith?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Colette, Margaret, and Vanessa.
Thank you.
My question relates, with the quarter's way through your presentation, you referred to new applications or a new applicant. So if there was a new applicant tomorrow, what rules apply? The current rules, I assume. Nothing has changed.
Nothing has changed. The current rules still apply. We have yet to decide what we will bring forward from the proposals made and what the changes to the injury benefit scheme rules will be.
So nothing.
Until those are declared, there will be no change to the existing processes.
And just then for clarity, and the Chair had raised it regarding the time limits. Obviously, I think that's number 4 in your consultation. You referred to this 3-month figure. Are you then saying that PTSD, you've no time limit agreed at this stage at all for that? None whatsoever?
None, no.
And so therefore, the 3 months is put out for consultation for injuries, whatever that injury may be. You have no decision taken on any of that stuff as yet?
No decisions have been taken.
Thanks.
Thanks. Jim? You're muted, Jim.
All right. Just before I come to the main point I want to raise, just on the point that Keith raised, Surely any time limits in relation to PTSD would only be relevant and sustainable if they were linked to not to the date of when they of diagnosis. Really, you can't punish someone because they didn't have the actual diagnosis in terms of time limits until they have the diagnosis, can you?
Well, you can't make a claim if you don't know that you have
Yes,
PTSD.
but once you know, would that not be the trigger point for any time limit, whatever it is?
Well, once a person knows, then that's what we'd be expecting them to, make a claim at that point. Yes.
And therefore, any time limit imposed from the date of diagnosis, presumably.
Well, we haven't decided on that yet, but those are options that we are looking at, yes.
Well, what else would be fair?
Well, the fairness is that if, say, for example, if someone was diagnosed 3 years ago and now makes a claim, do we still continue to backdate it whenever they were diagnosed 3 years ago and then pay arrears of 3 years? Or do we say from your date that you made your application? So it may be the later of rather than the earlier than.
The point I really wanted to get clarity on from you is this. What is the impact of this on existing claimants? You say it only kicks in for new claimants, but you caveated that by saying, unless we're applying the review mechanisms. So just explain to the committee, what are the practical changes for an existing claimant?
There are 8 recommendations within the proposal. The main one that may impact on the existing claimants is review.
Yes.
And that is again around whether or not someone who is re-employed, whether or not that re-employed salary should be taken into consideration to be looked at and reviewed accordingly.
So if someone is re-employed, presumably that is evaluated against the level of remuneration for that re-employment, not just the fact that they're re-employed.
That's right. There's a guaranteed minimum income that we pay under the injury benefit scheme.
Yes.
And that would just be offset against the injury benefits. They may not totally lose it. There may still be residual monies left over and they would still continue to receive an injury benefit.
Because under the scheme at the moment, you can be re-employed and that doesn't affect the level of your injury benefit, yes?
Well, there's potential for it to be abated depending on the level of income you receive.
So what practical change will it make for the existing claimant?
It depends if there's a change to their ability to be employed and earn money.
Above the level that they're presently being compensated for?
Yes.
And would that offsetting be at all retrospective?
No. We haven't considered that option, but...
No, I'm not suggesting you do.
Okay.
And in terms of the costs, you explained that with the historic cases and the current cases, the current cost is 6.5 million.
That's correct, yes.
Which in the scale of things isn't huge. But what's your expectation of the changes, what effect the changes you're anticipating would make on those costs?
Well, this year in total, there was about £400,000 paid in retrospective cases. So that's almost nearly £500,000. And that money would be saved because there would be less chance of retrospection.
So we're talking about saving £400,000? Right?
No, we'd also be looking at the cases where people recover enough to work, and that would save the employer money on an ongoing basis as well.
So presumably somebody somewhere has done a calculation as to what, if you proceed with these reforms, would be the saving to the public purse?
Not at present, because we still haven't fine-tuned exactly how we're going to implement any of the proposals.
So does that mean whether or not we're saving public money isn't the issue here?
Well, I did highlight a number of other changes that we need, the reasons why we had to change the scheme, that it's not all about spiralling costs. It is about the interpretation of what the purpose of the injury benefit scheme is about. And,
I must express some surprise that nobody has gamed this out as to what the effect of these changes would be on the public purse. We don't know if we're going to save $500,000, $1 million, $2 million a year. Is that correct?
Well, at the minute the provision is being made, and we have sort of demonstrated that the costs have trebled since 2015-16. And if that continues, then so much money will be ate up by the public purse to pay for these injury benefits.
But you can't tell us what your expectation is of what money will be saved.
Not at present, because we have no flavour of what injuries may arise, what may happen in the civil service of the future. What we would also like to do is sort of remove the ambiguity around those using the injury benefit scheme for disputes among their colleagues, disputes with managers.
You better explain that to us. What do you mean by that?
Well, this is the criteria within the injury benefit scheme is purely around injuries to sort of mental conditions, physical conditions. We receive applications from people who have fallen out with their line manager, and we debar them from, we do say they don't meet the criteria, but when they go to the Ombudsman, the person has been off ill because they had an argument with their line manager, and they potentially receive some form of recompense through the injury benefit scheme because they have fallen out with their line manager. When there's a grievance process to be used for that rather than the injury benefit scheme.
Sure, they have to manifest some mental or other injury in consequence of that fallout. They just don't get it for falling out, do they?
It's down to the perception.
Yes, but the scheme's based upon injury. That's in the title. So
that's correct.
The injury, you characterise it as falling out with their line manager. That's not a qualification. The qualification is injury from work.
That is correct, and we in civil service pensions do not allow those types of injury cases to proceed. However, it goes through an appeals process and go to the Ombudsman, and based on the information they receive in these type of queries, they are most likely to award these types of cases.
So how would these rules stop that?
Because under the section recommendation, we will define more clearly what injury and duty means.
So any injury and duty excluding falling out with your line manager?
Well, we may not say it in such terms, but yes.
But so does that mean if you get PTSD because of bullying or harassment or whatever at work, you wouldn't get an award because it could be classified as falling out with your line manager?
Well, the bullying and harassment is actually probably going to be something that is going to be documented and going to have a lot of substantial evidence behind it.
See, you're painting a picture to us of a very porous scheme, that all you have to do is turn up and say, I've fallen out with my line manager, where's my pension?
Well, I think that's part of the reason why it is so obsolete at the present time, because it is so porous.
So how are you going to define the qualifying aspect of injury then?
Well, that's what we're also working with legal colleagues on as well.
So
Might need a fair bit of work. Okay, thanks.
we don't have the definition. Okay, sorry, just a couple of things, sir. Quick ones for clarification. You talked about a review process that you're looking to introduce. Who's doing the review process?
It depends on what type of a review process that we introduce. If it's around a medical condition, which we are questioning, is this to do with a medical condition? It would be the Occupational Health Service.
Right.
If
Okay.
it's to do with earnings, then it would actually be ourselves that would look at the earnings, because we would just look to see if someone notifies us of re-employment or whether their earnings have changed for any other reason, like benefits cessating. And that would be ourselves and civil service pensions.
Okay. But you said something that makes me quite nervous, because when you said one of the things that happens is they take you to the Public Service Ombudsman or
That's
whatever,
correct.
to the Ombudsman, and they generally they say that they are due compensation. You know, we have a lot of faith in the Ombudsman's office and the role of the Ombudsman and what they're doing. They're obviously determining that based on the fact that there has been a real injury. Yeah,
They're based it on the fact that there's been the terms of a real injury, but it's also the fact that the scheme rules as they currently stand are so woolly.
But surely the role of the Ombudsman is the final court of appeal on this sort of process. And
That's correct, they are.
if the Ombudsman has actually determined that there is a real case to answer, they wouldn't be getting a compensation. So it seems to me that you're coming to us to say, we want to rewrite the rules, so we make it much harder for people to use the process to get compensation. You haven't given us any indication of what the financial implications are, because they haven't been bottomed out yet, because you haven't fully done the legislative process and to understand what is going to be determined to be injury and what isn't.
Yeah.
And
I don't think that we're going to make it harder for people to apply. I think it's just going to be clearer as to who can qualify. Those who have had genuine injuries, mental health issues, will still receive the benefits that they're due. And we're very much in favour of that. We're very much adamant that that will still continue to happen.
but
The
surely,
process should not be any harder than it already is.
but surely at the moment nobody's coming to apply for the injury benefit scheme who hasn't already talked to a medical professional or hasn't talked to somebody who's sort of occupational health. I'm not saying they're not medical professionals, but they've already done that particular piece of work. So what's the difference? That's what I'm not getting.
The difference is what is deemed to be a qualifying injury, and if there's another route for someone to seek redress or another route to be mediated or sorted out, at present that's not taken into account in the injury benefit scheme, whereby provision can be made to resolve an issue before it becomes an issue where we have to pay compensation.
Okay, that's fine. Might come back. Sorry, Malaysia.
Margaret, Colette, for how you righteous. Thank you, Colette, for your statement there. Just a couple of wee questions in relation to that. The ratio of mental health claims to physical injury, has that changed over the course of time?
It has. The purpose of the injury award originally was specifically to someone being shot, someone being involved in explosives, someone who actually had a more physical injury. But as we see over the years, a lot of it now has become mental illness.
And would you have any idea just of maybe the proportion of them that have been successful by individuals who have already retired?
We have some figures of the numbers of the current injury benefits that we're paying, or are you looking for something more specific?
Well, even in general.
Well, we're currently paying 548 injury benefits.
Yeah, and of those, how many of them are people who have already retired?
I would say the majority of them have already retired because they are in receipt of a permanent award. So most of those have to be retired to receive a permanent award.
Okay. And then in terms of scrutinising or the oversight of, we'll say, the people who are assessing their mental capacity or the extent of their injury, what do you have in place for that?
We have the Occupational Health Service. They do an assessment of the individuals.
Okay, Graham Margaret.
Okay, thanks. Pat?
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you, Colette. Colette, I see your department, it states that the vast majority of claims, 85% of those annual payments and 89% of one-off payments under the Northern Ireland Civil Service Scheme are for prison officers. Am I correct in this? But whenever you say there, I'm not picking out one profession, but 548 are what you've stated are people that are on the injury benefit. And if I look at the percentages, it really is only affecting one group or a majority of group of people, if that 89 to 90% is correct. Am I right on that?
70% are prison officers. 70.
Okay, and the extent of the liability has grown to the point where departments can't plan for this expenditure. That's what you'd said earlier. But I also noticed that over the last 5 years, this has trebled.
Yeah, that's correct.
Didn't it? Okay, so just give us 1 second till I. So just bear with. What I'm trying to get to here is the amount of money as you plan going forward. The committee will be. Yeah, here it is here. Can you advise as to how the legislative remedy will ensure, is there a breakdown as you plan for this expenditure and looking at that one group of people? I mean, are we talking about the rest of the civil services outside of that and they amount for 11%?
The scheme is open to all civil servants and those who are in the NDPB's prison service and such like. The other 30% are civil servants.
Okay, and are you aware of any other scheme in the UK which requires that short notice for mental health injuries? I mean, I'm looking at the 3 months. I'm thinking as well about maybe asbestos. There doesn't seem to be many claims coming through for those that maybe find themselves having to go out and work or survey buildings that later come in.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any? Are you getting any claimants for that? Sorry.
I'm not sure if we have had any recent claimants for asbestos. Most are around the likes of. We had a range of ones where deafness arose from where people did work in the past. So there was a batch of people who claimed for deafness.
I suppose my last question is, I've just looked at the equality screening and it suggests that the policy change would more likely impact on people who are male, Protestant and married. But this impact is recorded as minor or none. Is that correct? From your assessment?
That was at the time because the injury benefit scheme is open to all civil servants. It's those who avail of the scheme fall within that category. We're not debarring anyone else from applying.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Colette, sort of, a lot of what I heard is making me quite disquieted, to be quite honest. Is the reason why we're putting for the changes here from the Northern Ireland Civil Service Benefit Injury Scheme is because of the increase in numbers of prison officers who've been claiming?
It's not specific to prison officers.
But you've
As
mentioned,
I said, there's a number of...
You've mentioned on several occasions now the increase in numbers, and you specifically mentioned prison officers. And the information we have in front of us is obviously there's 230 odd prison officers, but of that, only 70 others are across the rest of the civil service. And you've said to us that the reason why you're coming through this is the increase in numbers of people claiming, and it's, you believe, on the pressure on the public purse. So is it specifically around prison officers? Is it this is the issue that's being raised?
It so happens that it is prison officers that are likely to be affected more than most. We accept that it is they do a job that probably will result in mental trauma. We have been asked by other employers outside the Northern Ireland Prison Office who have sometimes received a very high backdated award, and they go, how am I expected to pay for this? And it isn't directly always the prison service that are affected by these large backdated payments either.
Okay. And just one more question. I know two other members have indicated they want to come back in, and I'll let them back in it because it's such an important issue. When you were doing consultation on this and you were getting expert advice on it, you will probably have had expert advice that says PTSD normally occurs, particularly in people who've been in hazardous duty, normally occurs when they reach retirement age or there's been a significant change in their life, which is normally sometimes about 2 decades after the sort of the main events that have occurred. So when you had that advice, or did you have that advice, and if that was the case, why hasn't that been reflected in what you're saying? Because that would make quite clearly that that would explain the issue about the increasing numbers of people from the prison service being able, requesting these injury benefits.
I pass to Margaret Coyle, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think there's two elements to the whole backdating element, and we shouldn't confuse this. I think we need to make it very, very clear that we really appreciate that a lot of these issues manifest themselves much later in life, and we are not in any way deterring those people from making their application. So that's the first thing. So it could be 20 years further down the line that the member makes their application and says, I'm suffering from PTSD. The main part of the backdating, which is really the main point of the whole purpose of us reviewing this, is that the vast amount of money that's been paid out in backdated awards. So, albeit we certainly would not refuse applications for PTSD, no matter how further down the line that would be. What we are saying is that we have to be sensible in our approach about how far we backdate this. So, and Colette touched on this earlier on, if you have someone who has suffered PTSD, it could have been an injury or an incident that happened back in the 80s. However, they've managed to continue working, but then it actually hits them, they go to their doctor and the doctor says, yes, you're suffering from PTSD. From that date of the diagnosis is, for example, the date that we would say, right, this person can continue on working, we will pay injury benefit from this date. So that's the point that we're trying to make. There's two elements to this, and one is we would never ever consider putting a time limit on an issue around for example, PTSD that manifests itself way further on, and there will be no time limit in that. What we are considering is if the member has been able to continue working and then it manifests itself at such a rate that the person can't continue working, we would certainly then look from that date to award that person injury benefit.
Okay. Keith?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just a question, Colette, or some of the ladies there, in regard to I'm looking at two spreadsheets. April 2006 on, which is obviously approximately 15 years from then to now. and prior to the 1st of April 2006, how far does that go back? So the little box is indicating a number, but what period of time is that referring to? Prior to the 1st of April 2006?
I think we're going back to something like 1971 from memory here, so it goes back a considerable period of time.
Yeah. So that's 34, 35 years. Effectively, you have 35 years in one box and 15 years in another box for approximate figures, yeah? 4? Okay.
Yeah.
It's
Can
just,
I just say the expenditure is the annual expenditure? It's not a cumulative total?
yeah, but one box, I assume, refers to that period of time in totality. Because there's one box on top here after the 1st of April 2006 and prior to. So is it two different figures, or is the two boxes a totality?
Yeah, and I think that's just explaining that the employer became responsible for the cost from 2006 onwards, and that would have been coming out of the Dell budget, whereby prior to 2006 it would have been paid by civil service pensions, and that would have been out of the AME budget. So that was the difference. The employer took over responsibility from 2006. The costs.
Whenever you look at the boxes, and one final question,
Sorry, no.
Chair, in regard to prison service, and obviously they're the higher numbers, it seems to be, and it sounds like, that the prison service staff, male or female, is the ones that had the difficult job, some indeed paid the ultimate sacrifice, and it seems to be those are the ones that's going to get penalised, and it's not their fault that there's been injuries. So if that had been on, for example, and I don't mean this any disrespect to road service, DFI, would have been the same, interrogation? I'll leave it like that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Sorry, Jim, just for a short one, please.
Oops. Yeah, I just wanted to, I got a little confused about the numbers. When Tibet first gave them, I noted down that in 2021 there was 3.9 million being paid in respect of 301 civil service awards. Is that figure correct?
Yeah.
And then for the prior to 06, there was 2.6 million in being paid in respect of, I have noted 147 awards. Is that right?
247 awards.
247, thank you. Which is how then you get to the 548. Is there any maximum amount that can be paid?
The guaranteed maximum amount of income from the injury benefit scheme is 85% of their pensionable pay.
So if you look at those 2021 figures of 3.9 for 301 awards, that's an average of about £13,000 per person, is that right?
It very much depends on their level of income and their levels of service.
Yes, but 300 divided into 3.9 million gives you 13,000.
Yeah,
Is that
some
a fair
get more,
reflection
some
of
get
this?
less.
Is that a fair reflection of the sort of awards we're talking about?
If that's the average figure.
Is 3.9 include the administrative costs, or is that the actual cost of the award?
That's the actual costs. There's no administrative costs.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Sorry, just a bit, Margaret, just a quick one. You said something about shifting over from AME to Dell in, was it 2006? Can I just get clarification on that?
It was 1st of April 2006 that the employers took on the responsibility of the costs for the injury benefit scheme. We recharged the cost to the employers. Prior to that, it was covered by the scheme.
Okay.
By AME.
Okay, you'll be, Colette, Margaret, thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much indeed for giving your evidence, and I think you've given this committee an awful lot to think about, but thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you write to the department on various things?
Oh yeah, I definitely think so. Okay, just wait until everybody's off.
Back in.
Are we clear?
Back in. Yep.
Okay, team, any thoughts on the evidence we have received? Anything in particular? I must admit, I didn't find that. I found the explanations behind it quite worrying.
Jim, you're on mute.
Sorry.
Sorry. I was going to say it struck me as a bit random at times, the evidence. I was really searching for where's the rationale here.
Yeah.
And you get to the point of, well, we're stopping people getting benefits because they fell out with their line manager. Like, I don't know. I find that stretching it a bit, but
Look, I think I'd quite like to write to the Minister and ask for some more clarity in this, because they haven't done a financial, they haven't looked at financial income and outcome. They haven't done the financial bit. They don't know what's defined yet by what's going to be deemed to be injuries. They haven't done that yet. It seems to me, it looks like they've looked at one particular area, which was prison officers, but they haven't really defined what, again, is what meant by injury. They haven't closely defined what the plan is. They said they're still reviewing what the implications will be. There just doesn't seem to be very much information here for us to even be considering. I don't think it's, I do not think this has been particularly well thought out in any form whatsoever, unless somebody can, and I'm looking round, I'm not saying from Lucy or Pat or Keith. I don't get, I'm struggling with this.
Right to the Minister.
Yeah, that's right to the Minister. Are we agreed?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay, thank you.
Oh, this
Yeah. Okay, next from that to financial reporting bill. Elaine, are you there?
Eileen?
Hi, Elaine, how are you?
Hello.
Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can indeed. That's great. Thank you very much indeed. The committee will now receive an oral briefing on RAISE on the Financial Reporting Department and Public Bodies Bill. The relevant research paper is in tabled items. Eileen, do you want to sort of crack on?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Good afternoon. And I apologise I've been suffering a horrible cold and cough, so apologies. So I'm going to speak to you about Financial Reporting Departments and Public Bodies Bill. And first, what I'm going to do is outline for you key considerations to support the committee scrutiny of the individual provisions itself in the briefing. I need to note that the briefing is from a research perspective, not that of an accountant, nor of an expert in the Northern Ireland's complex financial processes, as well as the related rules. So, as you all know, that necessitates very high-level technical knowledge. But
Eileen,
nonetheless,
as much
hopefully
as
the
expert as
briefing
anybody
will
is.
support you and help you to develop the thinking as well as the knowledge and understanding of the bill. So I hope through the offering of some scrutiny points, the committee may wish to pursue them and help in terms of formulating its report when it gets replies back at the close of its consideration of the bill. So what I'm going to do is first provide you with some background information to orientate, and then move to the bill itself as it was introduced by the Minister of Finance. Looking at the provisions and then moving on to the bill's key impact, followed by the continuing issues, even when the bill, if it is enacted rather. And I'll draw your attention to the scrutiny points that I mentioned earlier, and then hopefully leave you with some concluding remarks that are helpful. Chair, again, I respectfully remind that I'm not an accountant and I'm not the expert in this complex area. So hopefully that can be borne in mind with the questions and answers at the end of the session. So let's start with a very short background of where and how we got to the point of this bill, which, as you know, is a part of the review of the financial processes. We know that under the current systems, the framework that is Northern Ireland estimates and accounts, that it's defined by a number of legislative and non-legislative bases. And there's a number of publications that are produced by Treasury as well as DOF to enable lawful exercise of public finance decision making and accountability to the public. There's three particular publications that I just want to quickly highlight, as the committee will be familiar with their names. The Supply Estimates in Northern Ireland, a guidance manual, financial reporting, the Government Financial Reporting Manual, commonly referred to as FRIM, and Managing Public Money, the Treasury one as well as the Northern Ireland. Just very quickly running through the guidances, you'll remember that the supply estimates are the heart of public spending control, and that it's through the estimates that the executive seeks the Assembly's authority and its spending plans, and that both the departments and DOF must work together when they are working in the area and ensure that all the estimates meet the highest standards that are enunciated in the legislative and non-legislative guidances and requirements. So basically, this first document about the estimates guidance is about improving financial reporting standards in Northern Ireland. But it's important to remember that it has to be read in conjunction with all the legislative and non-legislative requirements. So basically, it makes for a very complicated area. And because of that, it also makes it very difficult for the committee, as well as the public and the rest of the Assembly, to engage as fully and as effectively as they can in their scrutiny and their advisory role in these areas, which is why it's important that we understand that the key features of the existing estimates arrangements are addressed through this bill. So important things to note about the current system is that, as we all know, we moved to GRANI, that's the Government Resource and Accounts Act Northern Ireland 2001, which was a significant change in the financial processes, including for the estimate, because through GRANI, it enabled the full introduction of resource accounts and accruals accounting in the planning, the budgeting, and the expenditure control process. That was a significant move, and it resulted in the amendment of what we call the Exchequer and Audit Act Northern Ireland 1921. So it goes very far back to a piece of legislation and amends it to bring a completely different system forward. So that's the first thing I want to highlight to you about a distinctive feature of the arrangement. Another thing that then arises is there are very significant differences between the estimates, budgets, and accounts systems, meaning there's boundaries between each of those. And as I said before, there is a high level of technical knowledge required to navigate them, because it makes it difficult to understand the links and the interrelationships between them. And given those challenges, that adversely impacts their transparency and their operation, and it also reduces then the accountability across. Right? I know the committee is well aware with that, and in its engagement so far on the bill, and in years previously, they've been highlighting that to the department. But another thing I want to again remind the committee about is that the estimate system is it is based on the Westminster model. But there is an important distinction to note between the Northern Ireland and Westminster estimate system, and that's that the departments in Northern Ireland are statutory corporations, and this is unlike the ministers of the Crown in Westminster. So basically, because of this distinction, in Northern Ireland, departments are having to exercise their powers, their authority, but note that it only extends to what is specified in legislation, meaning they must have specified legislative authority to take action, to act in a specified area and manner. And additionally, they also have to have the specified power, authority to spend in that area and manner. So basically to finance the taking of the action. So those are the things important to note about the estimate system. You will recall that the department came to speak to yourselves about the draft guidance that should be an outworking of the dry runs they've been undertaking. And if this bill is successful, it will then seek to look to better align the estimates and their resource accounts. So that's the first piece of guidance that I want to bring and highlight a few things about. The second is FREM, and just very briefly is to remember it's a statutory guidance and it's for the government bodies to prepare their annual reports and accounts. So basically it does three distinct things. It's supposed to set out principles for financial reporting, give guidance on performance reporting and accountability disclosures, as well as adopt and interpret the international financial reporting standards that are used throughout the public sector. It's important to be aware of these things. Additionally, it's also guidance that is necessary to understand, for example, in relation to the preparation of the accounts for whole of government. And in terms of meeting those, there's four, overarching purposes for the financial reporting in government. And it's the, just bear with me here, the four principles are important to think about when we go through these areas, because they can remind us of what the how the committee, it can guide, I guess you could say, how the committee can undertake its advisory and its scrutiny role when moving forward through the areas. And I'm sorry, my paper just slipped here. 5, 6, 7, 8. If you bear with me. Okay, so if we're thinking about FREM and we want to remember the four overarching purposes, and these things are important when we keep in mind the bill and what its intended purpose is, we have to remember that it's to maintain and ensure parliamentary control and holding the government accountable. We have to think about how it enables the public and researcher to understand and consider value for money in public spending, but also that it provides a credible and an accurate record, and that it provides government officials with information required to run the departments and agencies as well, and that this is all done efficiently and effectively. But it is something of note for the committee, again, when it thinks about the bill, and also because this bill is only part of the review of financial processes. So when we think about the bill, but also the many things that are going to be happening in future, when you think about those four overarching purposes, it's important to remember not equally weighted. And the first purpose that I mentioned there about maintaining and ensuring parliamentary control and holding government to account is the supreme one. And that's what it says actually in the guidance in FREM. Something maybe that the committee may wish to include in its report on the bill. Okay, moving to the next piece of guidance is managing public money. We know that there's one from Treasury, and then there's one from DOF, the Department of Finance, and they're basically very similar. Main distinction is that the annexes, Treasury one, are really about England. So we have managing public money in Northern Ireland, which gives a detailed rule book specifically for Northern Ireland. It applies, these principles apply to all public sector, and they're basically about propriety and accountability in public finance. So against that context of the frameworks that we're working in, there's been, as we all know, this committee in particular, longstanding efforts, actions, criticism in relation to the present arrangements about reporting and controlling public expenditure. And bottom line, basically, it is extremely confusing and usually very unhelpful. We know that some of those developments began in 2000, date back as far as 2007 on a central level, but the ones that I really want to concentrate on here are the ones that have happened in a devolved level, and they date back from to 2008. There's been reports from this committee after an inquiry, 3 reports, that is, one in 2008, one in 2010, and one in 2011. And I think it's really important to highlight these reports because although they are inspired in part by Treasury's Clear Line of Sight project that in 2007, I think it would be fair to say, and having been a part of that inquiry, that those reports from the committee significantly contributed to the Department of Finance and Personnel, formerly that's what it's called, and now DOF, its thinking in relation to reform in this area. And I think it's also important to highlight that those reports and those efforts and engagement with the department proactively, not reactively, helped to inform the February 2011 decision when the executive agreed to undertake the review of financial process. And again, you may remember that was about the aim of this review, which is still ongoing in some way, is about bringing forward streamlined financial frameworks, which are efficient, transparent, open to scrutiny, and accountable by the Assembly. But if it is by the Assembly, it also makes it the public finance decision making also more accountable to the public, which is helpful. So in particular, it was to align the budget estimates and accounts as far as practically possible and improve the transparency. And then we know it was to synchronize the presentation of the budget estimates, the expenditure plans, the budget bills, and as well move to the rates legislation and the accounts. Basically, to create a sync coordinated public revenue and expenditure process. Very important to keep in mind those aims and objectives, because with this bill, it's one of the outworking, but there will be other measures and bills coming forward. December 2016, the executive formally agreed that DOF should continue to take forward the review. Yes, there is a bit of a gap from 2011 to 2016, but that's where we are. So we've been moving on since we had the political hiatus. There has been a number of efforts from 2017 to date. More recently have been the dry runs that the committee has heard about from the department, and now we have this bill. And it's been helpful to receive some of the updates from the department, particularly in relation to the work of the departmental working group, which includes representation from across the departments as well as NIAO. It's a sitting member on it. I'm not sure of NIAO's status on that. I don't know if it's more an advisory rather than a full member of the group. I think it's important, again, for the report that the committee remind the department that it continue to receive the briefings from the officials in the Public Spending Directorate very regularly, because it helps to know what's coming down the track, and it also affords an opportunity for this committee to become more actively involved in the outworkings of the review. So we land here now at the bill. It's probably one of the more important, more recent developments review. Its underlying purpose, as I noted earlier, is to improve transparency and understanding regarding estimates and resource accounts. It's in line with the overarching review of financial process, and but it's important to remember that it's not going to address everything in that review, obviously. As one of the DOF officials told you, it is not a panacea. It is a very short bill, 4 clauses, very technical in nature. Excuse me.
You okay?
We're on a road. That's the best way to think about it as we move forward. So if I bring you to the specific clauses in the paper that I have tabled for you, it's page 14 of the actual paper. I'm not sure what it is in the page for your packs, but the 4 clauses that I've referenced there, they effectively introduce new statutory power for the Department of Finance, that is, to be exercised in consultation with the Department and Treasury, so that they can make designations of bodies orders, that is, through subordinate legislation, each financial year, and that it can include NDPBs, non-departmental public bodies, or other bodies, and it equally can exclude public corporations, which are outside the departmental budgeting boundary, and bodies which continue to misalign in terms of estimates, accounting, and budgeting. As well as that, it empowers the department to issue directions that will specify requirements that must go into the departmental supply estimates and annual accounts, including those for designated NDPBs or other bodies funded from the Northern Ireland Consolidated Fund. And it's important to note those designations will have to be made by DOF in consultation with Treasury, and that's all about avoiding the designated bodies being jointly funded by another UK consolidated fund. Mm-hmm. And in addition to all of that, it will require amendment of granny as appropriate. It's important to, in terms of all of the provisions within the bill, it's important to recognize that the designation order in the bill that will the creation of the need for subordinate legislation in order to designate the bodies, that is, it will go by negative resolution. Important to point that follows precedent done in England and Wales under the England and Wales Constitutional Reform and Governance Act 2010, which makes similar arrangements and basically amends granny in for those jurisdictions. I know that act was done in 2010. We're in 2021 now, catching up. The reason why negative resolution is, again, like England and Wales has been shown, is because it provides flexibility and speed to allow for updates when necessary. That's what we were advised by the Office of the Examiner of Statutory Rules and the memorandum that they prepared on the delegated powers for this bill. It's also important to note that the importance of that engagement with Treasury to avoid misdesignation of bodies, because the implication for that could be significant in public finance terms. You'll be familiar with the explanatory and financial memorandum that does point out that there appear to be no human rights and equality issues arising from the bill. That seems to be the case. There's nothing immediately apparent given the technical nature of this bill. It also speaks about financial implications of the bill, and that it's not anticipated that the bill will give any rise to significant additional expenditure, but potentially it may be worthwhile for the committee to ask the department that, albeit while they're not foreseen to be significant, maybe the department could specify what additional expenditure would actually be needed to fully implement the bill's provisions. For example, if enacted as introduced, what additional costs would there be relating to staffing, new IT, meaning hardware or software, or other, and maybe detailing of those types of costs and estimated amounts would be beneficial. Because remember, this is being rolled out across the departments and across the designated bodies. So, in addition, a few other items maybe to note, particular import, is that there has been this issue about the title, the interpretation of the long title. and admissibility of amendments. You will recall that there was a response from DOF about what their view was in relation to the title of the bill, and they did indicate that they thought that it accurately reflected it at a high level as to what the bill encompassed, but that it would advise the committee on what it believed may be the scope of the bill, given that the committee had noted decisions on the admissibility of amendments was a matter of the Speaker. So, that may be something that the committee may wish to engage further with the department about if it's not satisfied with that response. Another item of note is that there is a consequential amendment to the bill in relation to designated bodies. As you may recall, in May 2021, the committee's evidence session with DOF about the contents addressed the possibility of that, particularly in relation to the Public Services Ombudsman in Northern Ireland, and that DOF had a role in directing accounts under the 2001 Act. Granny, that is, the committee was considering it. That is in May, a change to reference is to the resource accounts and the estimates so that they would properly align, and that they were seeking advice at that time. At second stage in June, that is second stage of the bill, the minister addressed that issue and had said that it still was looking into a consequential amendment to ensure that the changes made fully aligned with the legislation. The legislation that is for the establishment of independent bodies such as NIPSO. He was pointing out the importance of the alignment of the estimates with the process while also safeguarding their independence. But again, they were going to be continuing to look at that. There has been a response to the Committee for Finance's summer call for evidence on the bill. That was noteworthy, and it came from NIPSO, and it was advising a few key points from it. Was that the acknowledging that these arguments or these positions had been put forward by the minister at second stage, and asserting that it's now a well-established principle of scrutiny and approval that the NIPSO budget by the Assembly Audit Committee is an essential element to ensure independence. But in order to continue to deliver redress for individuals and contribute to the improvement in public services, NIPSO would require sufficient resources, and the role for audit must not be interfered with. And basically was looking for some clarity from the minister and the departments about the implications of the ministerial undertaking. So NIPSO advised the committee that they were satisfied that the proposals contained in the bill, combined with the minister's assurance that there were, in combination, there was no issue regarding independence of that office, and instead understand that the bill is designed to contribute just simply to the simplification and the alignment of budgets, estimates, and resource account. Nonetheless, maybe the committee may wish to have the department updates on the current position, specifically about the noted consequential amendment to the bill itself. There are the significant bits in relation to the bill, but and responses, particularly that the committee has received. But I think it's important to also now look at some of the key impacts that would arise from the bill. And I ask you to turn back to May 2021, when the DOF official advised the committee that in relation to certain bodies, sorry.
Sorry, no, I just remember when he said it was not going to be a panacea. That's all the answers, yep.
Yes, so this was when the committee was speaking about the exclusion of some bodies in the designation orders, particularly in relation to Northern Ireland Water, and how they would be excluded because they continue to be in this alignment, and that's got to do with their status as a GoPo company. There's a lot of issues that will still need to be addressed in relation to the designation orders, and it's the departments have spoken about that, but also it's important to note that in the responses that the committee has received so far from the department, it would be maybe worthwhile to find out the Department for the Economy designations, because they were excluded from the list that had been provided to the committee on all the departments' potentially designated bodies. And that was something that maybe could be picked up on in order to have a more to have a list, basically, and confirmation of what the Department of Finance has represented to the committee. Just clarity, what are the Department for Economy designated bodies? In relation to further issues arising in relation to the designations, particularly that have arisen out of the committee's call for evidence, the Northern Ireland Local Government Officers Superannuation Committee, they have highlighted that they had some concerns about it, and it would be, their concerns, again, is about the classification itself. So it may be worthwhile for DOF to provide its view on NILGO's response to the committee. Again, they're querying the designation, and they're actually asking that NILGO's is removed from the list of designations by DOF, given what their function and their role is, their oversight role. It's also important to note the Assembly Commission's response and what they had raised in relation to the designations. And again, it's about this important point about independence, and that the minister did say that there was certain ongoing conventions, but it's important, again, the Assembly Commission says it's important that the Assembly Commission does not conduct its estimates process through the Audit Committee, but the Assembly Commission's budget is scrutinised by the Audit Committee and then approved by the Assembly. So the approach adopted in the bill for the Audit Office may also be appropriate for the Assembly Commission. Again, it just that you may be find it helpful to receive DOF's view on that. Other continuing issues that will inevitably arise if the bill is enacted as introduced concern, and this pulls off of a number of evidence bases concerning DOF correspondence with the committee, committee evidence sessions, Assembly plenary debates, as well as responses to the call. And there's 5 discrete areas that seem to arise. One already I started to speak about was the misaligned bodies. The second is about north-south bodies. And another issue is about DOF directions that would be issued, and specifically what's in their contents. A further issue is about DOF dry runs that have been undertaken so far. And again, that's about that engagement between the committee and the department in learning more and the lessons learned by the department through those dry run exercises, and then how those lessons are being pushed into the future actions. Again, maybe the committee having more knowledge of that can help to encourage and incentivize in those areas. And then the ongoing issue of data. So again, misaligned bodies, there's been a lot of discussion in the in second stage. A lot of assurance is given by the Minister about the engagement, but also it's important to remember, as said in May by a DOF official, there needs to be maybe greater understanding about the different status of the different organisations and how some of them simply can't be brought inside a boundary, because there's also a role of the Office of, for National Statistics in this, for example, in relation to TransLink, because they're designated by ONS as a public corporation. And basically, all these different status mean that they sit inside or outside certain budgeting certain estimates and accounts boundaries, which make it impossible for things to align and result in them continuing to be a misalignment. DOF official has assured the committee that they will be continuing to look at these things, but a proactive, engaged role by the committee going forward is certainly something worth thinking. In relation to the North-South Bodies Memorandum, queries arising out of that come out of the call for evidence by the committee. Safe food particularly raised the issue of a memorandum that they are required to follow, and there needs to be clarity on what kind of engagement there is going to be on future directions issued by DOF that would then in turn be impactful in terms of them operating within the parameters of their memorandum. And another group that replied to the committee was Special European Union Programs Body, and they, in relation specifically to raising the point about financial memorandum, they simply said that they have to follow such a governance document as well. So they weren't specifically raising the issue that there could be tensions between the directions and the memoranda, but potentially it's an issue that the committee might want to pursue with them. Mm-hmm. There's not great clarity over, again, this is a scrutiny point, over what kind of engagement there has been by DOF with North-South bodies or in terms of North-South bodies. That may be something the committee wants to learn in a more detailed way. And also if any of that discussion included mention of the financial memorandum that was mentioned by Safe Food. There may be other bodies where these issues arise. Moving on to the directions that are going to be issued by DOF if the bill is enacted. There's a lot in there that probably should be thought about. The Northern Ireland Audit Office said that it will be keeping a watching brief to monitor the directions. It might be interesting to know to date what engagement DOF has undertaken so far, or what it does intend to undertake in future, to detail maybe for the committee who, when, and what the main points were that have been made and agreements reached in relation to those directions, just so the committee has a better steer and the committee can be satisfied about that they're going to do, that they're fit for purpose, the directions, and they help actually to achieve the overarching aims of the review of financial processes. In relation to departmental dry runs, more in-time updates could be provided by the department, so that we're left the department, so that the committee is not being as reactive and maybe can be proactive and helping to inform how that is, how those dry runs are going forward. And as I said, that lessons of the past are being driven into future implementation plans. And Department of Justice in particular, I'd like to highlight in its response to the call for evidence by the committee. They had talked about their phased implementation plan and their work in the area to date. And they also, it appears that, there has been a lot of engagement, but maybe learning in a more detailed way about whether Department of Justice's experience is representative of all the departments, and maybe something the committee wants to learn more about. In terms of data, the committee did try to advise on the level of additional data which would be included in the estimates and the changes to the resource accounts. You may remember that from the June 14th session. You may recall, Chairperson, you in particular at second stage had drawn attention to the Minister that there's apparent dissatisfaction with the amount of data granularity that's going to be gained by this, and that we will wait to see. Going forward, again, to ensure that Assembly information and data needs are met, and as well as the public's, that the data is better, the allocating and the decision making and the spending is better understood and more appropriately factored in to ongoing and future work under the bill. DOF maybe the committee may wish to ask, could it come to those more regular and active engagement in a more detailed manner, not just generally speaking, but in terms of the design, the compilation, and the implementation of the guidance that's going to come forward, the templates, and anything else, including.
Sorry, Eileen, I'm sorry to cut across you, but we're just on our quorum now. Could you wind up? Sorry, please. Sorry, we're just on our quorum.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you.
The Fiscal Council is the final to maybe highlight, nearly here at the end. The Fiscal Council replied in the call and raised a number of points going forward. They say that the bill certainly is in line and taking forward parts of the review of the financial processes program, but they also, again, are echoing points about data and the need for greater transparency, and to move away from the opacity and using net spending in particular. Going forward, or before writing the committee report, that may be something that the committee wishes to engage specifically on with the Fiscal Council, as well as in relation to learning more about their thing, Northern Ireland Water, and how it would require a separate solution. And in terms of addressing the complexities that arise about accounting and budgeting treatments, particularly since we all know it receives a significant amount of spending. Again, the committee may wish to engage further with the council about that. So basically, it's a short bill, simple bill. It should go somewhat to improve alignment between the estimates and resource accounts. It should help to move towards a financial framework that's effective, efficient, transparent, and enables more scrutiny and accountability. But there are the issues that have been raised in this report. Whilst the bill takes us further, it also raises additional issues around the designation orders, the misaligned bodies, the north-south bodies, memorandum, the directions in particular, knowing specifically what they're going to say, including the templates that are going to be, the departments are going to have to populate. And again, more, maybe greater engagement on the dry runs. And in relation to the data transparency, hopefully the memorandum of understanding that has been in negotiation between the department and the committee for some time now can help to facilitate and bring in more transparency in addition to the bill. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed for a very comprehensive briefing. I'm sure that sort of just going through a couple of things that I've picked up on and the things I probably want to get clarity from the Minister on. The issue of DOF, Department of Finance designation orders, who does it apply to? And more importantly, who's in and who's out?
Okay, so those were provided to the committee. They're actually in the information. So they've given us an indication, and the committee actually wrote to everybody. Yep. So if you look at page Here it is. It's page 165 of your packs. It's there. They've identified all of the NDPPs apart from the ones on DFE, which they didn't provide, so we can follow up on those. But then it indicates
the DFEs ones,
who's within the boundary, and then what would be the expected position in respect of the designation order.
Yep.
So that we know.
Peter, if I could just add there, the importance about that is even in that table that they provided, there's not always agreement about the rationale as to why it's why it's inside or outside the boundary, which is coming out of the call for evidence responses to the committee.
Indeed, that's why the committee wrote to the department last week. And hopefully they will come next week and they'll explain on things like, Northern Ireland Water, I think, is clear cut, but also the Assembly Commission, the treatment of the NIPSO, and the cross-border bodies. So those are on the department's list of things to explain to the committee next week.
Yeah, okay.
And it may be helpful to learn about TransLink and what the thinking is, although it's outside now, but what's the thinking about remedying?
Okay, yep. So that's me answered on. I should have done my homework. Thank you very much indeed, Clark. Thank you. So, smack wrist for the chair, to do that as well. And so I've got stuff on directions, questions to north-south bodies. I think sort of the questions that Anne has raised through Ray's rest of it, we should forward those onto the department so we can get those as well. If we are content. Are we content? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Anne. Get better.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
So, Chairperson, just to clarify, next week we have the Bill Office, which will be in closed session at the start. Claire will probably will hopefully indicate the extent to which she thinks the bill is amendable. So if members have thoughts about amendments, if you could bring those next week, we'll be enclosed. And if you're are fairly definite about those, if there are things that you're looking for committee support for, next week is your opportunity to just indicate those. And we, again, Bill Office might be able to tell you how admissible they will be, and we'll also have the department along later, and they may provide you with reassurances. Or what committees have done in the past is they've persuaded the department to adopt the amendment, which is a very handy outcome if we can, if that works out. Sorry, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Moving on to correspondence. Fortunately, we've got quite a few items of correspondence to get through, but we'll canter through them as much as we can. But there's some quite important items here we need to have a look at. First up, October monitoring, interim position. Members are asked to note the top departmental correspondence at page 190, including a copy of the interim position in respect to October monitoring. Correspondence indicates that just under 11 million of repaid rates rebate from large retailers in 2021 was lost to the executive and had to be returned to the Treasury. Remember, this was the large supermarkets who gave the money back. The department is expected to provide an update paper shortly, which will include further details on LRRSS expenditure 21-22, and is expected to exceed the 64 million allocated to LRSS in June monitoring. Any comments? Content to note?
Was that just a timing? Sorry, Chair. Was that a timing issue that 11 million had to go back to Treasury? What was the reason for that?
No.
I think it was that it was. I think the committee raised this issue that, if you recall, at the end of the last financial year, there were millions of pounds sloshing about. There were special arrangements to allow us to carry a wee bit more over, but there was a stack of money, and I think that was in that forest of cash. So I think that's what happened, but we could write to the department to seek clarity.
Would you like us to write to the department to seek clarity?
Please, thanks.
Excellent. Next item, investing activity, September. Members are asked to note page 203, a copy of the September capital activity report for the Department of Finance. As members are aware, the Department's capital expenditure is based on the reform of property management programme. Thus, there are only two large projects, James House and Orchard House refurbishments. Are we content to note?
Noted.
Content to note. Next item, public expenditure statement. Members are asked to note on page 206 a copy of the public income and expenditure account statement for 2021. The statement indicates that the RRI debt increased to 1.5 billion. Now, listen carefully to this bit. The statement also advises that temporary investments and other capital payments increased by 3.3 billion to 6.1 billion, and this was mainly due to the increase in the overnight investment of temporary cash surpluses as additional funding was held at the start of the pandemic to enable departments to make emergency payments. I don't really understand that,
No.
and I'm going to ask for clarity, and I would like a written explanation of that from the department. I don't actually understand that. Obviously, it is obviously some form of clever government accounting, but I don't understand how we got to that point, and I would just like some clarity on that.
Yeah, I presume it's a cash management question, which is no actual public spending implications, but I agree.
It is substantial in the rest of it.
I mean, it doesn't mean that it sounds like what was it? Yeah. So, yeah, okay.
Yeah. The next one is, the statement also indicates debt levels for the Northern Ireland Housing Executive at 118 million and local government debt at 477 million. There's also a reference to an internal audit report into the government accounts branch undertaken in 2016. Is the committee content to write to the department seeking A, an explanation regarding the increase in capital payments and temporary investments, sight of the GAB internal audit report, and perhaps ask Assembly Research to brief on the statement at a suitable juncture in the future? I think, at least for my education, I would be quite happy for that as well. Agreed? Thank you. Next item on the agenda, increasing delegation limits. Members are asked to note at page 238 a response from the department to committee queries relating to the increase in departmental delegation limits, i.e. for IT projects from 1 million to 5 million, for external consultancy, removal of the requirement of DOE approval for all cases above 75,000, and for capital projects from 2 million to 5 million. When it says external consultancy, does that mean removal of the requirement of the DFE for all approval above cases for 75,000?
That's what it said.
Can we get clarification on that? Because external consultancy can be a considerable amount. I think the amount the Northern Ireland Executive has paid over to the likes of PwC and Deloitte is considerably more than 75,000.
Okay.
Can we get some clarity on that?
Right.
Sorry, members, I should have picked up on that earlier and sort of raised that. That's a question we should have asked, but we'll do that. The department has also provided a copy of the relevant 2019 review report, which indicates that the impact of the delegation limit change would lead to a reduction of 30% of lease approvals by the Department of Finance. And just for information, only 25% of primary school bills require Department of Finance approval. Departments have the authority in some cases to approve staff pay increases, and this reduced the number of pay remit cases considered by the Department of Finance by 80%. So that's obviously in the changes of the increase up to sort of the 5 million, within the 5 million total to do with that. The report also indicates that at the time 2019 there was an inconsistent use of the casework committees across the departments. The intention to use the 5-case model for business case development from the 1st of April 2020. Executive summaries for some public interest cases may be published, and the level of business case test drilling by Department of Finance is just 2 departments per annum. Sorry? 2 departments per annum?
Yep.
Where 10% of business cases are selected. That doesn't seem to be much in the way of scrutiny.
I think their argument is that it would be more focused. So rather than doing these case drilling, test drilling, business case test drilling for all departments, they'll pick out a couple of departments and hopefully they will not then miss the wood for the trees.
And so the report also refers to an RHI lessons learned review papers, which of course we haven't seen and we're asking to see. Sorry, go ahead, Keith.
Just on that, you talk about 2 departments. How do they pick that or select those? And at what point do they come around again to that department? That could be a serious period of time.
And why did they select them? Because they spent the most, spent the least. How did they spend it? What's the selection process? What's the process behind it? If we could write to the department along those lines as well.
Very good.
Thank you. Next item is the personal injury discount rate. The committee is asked to note page 324 correspondence from the Committee for Justice to the Minister expressing concerns in respect to changes to the personal injury discount rate associated with the damages return on investment bill, and seeking assurance that the Minister is discussing the financial implications with the Treasury. Do we know what the delta is for that?
I don't think they know either. They know that it's going to be more than the current level, That was the question. I think, as I recall, the then chair of the Justice Committee raising that in plenary. What is it? Yeah. Is the Wells versus Wells level or something? Yeah. So they knew it was going to be higher than that, but they didn't know what it was actually going to be. So I think the department has actually just responded, so that will be in PACS next week. Okay, excellent. Thanks very much. Are we content to note, subject to getting the information next week? Yes, thanks. Department of Education, Fiscal Council. The committee is asked to note on page 327, correspondence from the department providing commentary on the role of the Fiscal Council. The response appears to indicate some disquiet amongst that department and a call for wider consultation on the role of the Fiscal Council. I don't think the department got the memo that said it was independent Fiscal Council, and that's part and parcel of the reason why we're doing this. Are we content to note?
It's a bit concerning. Sorry, if I may, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I know this is originally from, the original letter to the Clerk of the Education Committee from earlier this year, so perhaps I shouldn't be commenting on that. But it's a bit, yeah, it seems a bit, their comments seemed a bit, personally, concerningly, sort of under-informed about the purpose of a fiscal council, and it's a bit concerning that they hadn't really, that it was a bit like, it's a bit sort of simplistic and uninformed a view, if I'm honest.
I wouldn't use the language simplistic, I would use the word uninformed, but it does seem a rather strange piece of correspondence.
But I know it's from July, so maybe more, they're more across the details since then. Anyway.
Okay, noted. Okay. Next, Fiscal Commission presentation. The committee is asked to note on page 338 a copy of the Fiscal Commission presentation on the challenges, etc., associated with enhancing devolved tax varying powers. The Commission has been invited to brief on its interim report before Christmas recess. I would thoroughly encourage everybody to read that and read that at some length. And is the committee content to note? Noted. Noted. Great. Committee cooperation. The committee is asked to note on page 362 a response from the Finance and Public Administration Committee of the Scottish Parliament, setting out possible areas of cooperation between committees in the devolved administrations. Is the committee content to note and to delegate to the clerk arrangements for future committee cooperation? Agreed.
Agreed. I would also specifically say that the post spending review might be a good moment to
that's what we're
collaborative approach.
Next item of correspondence, fire safety. What is that to note on page 365 a response from the Minister indicating that the cross-departmental group will meet on 8th of October 21 and is to consider the need for fire safety legislation in line with other jurisdictions. Are we content to note and also to encourage the department to accelerate this process, because again it's been an area of concern of this committee for some time?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah.
NICS recruitment and selection. The committee is asked to note page 368 correspondence from the Minister indicating that an expert HR panel has been established to consider a new recruitment and selection framework for the Northern Ireland Civil Service. The policy framework is to be provided to the Minister for approval in early October 2021, which is now. The Department is to brief on related matters in early November 21. Matthew, do you want to make a comment on that?
Simply to say that, to sort of reiterate the point coming on from what the session we had last week, that I'm still slightly concerned / surprised that the various strands of HR, civil service reform and post-RHI initiatives have not yet been folded into one kind of programme of reform. From a presentational perspective, I think that would be wise, let alone more comprehensible. But anyway, that's my only comment.
Okay. Next item of correspondence, the Shared Prosperity Fund. The committee is asked to note page 371 correspondence from the Department with respect to the Shared Prosperity Fund and Community Renewal Fund. Prospectus and investment framework document for the Shared Prosperity Fund is likely to be released with the spending review at the end of this month. The fund will be managed by the, do I have to say that? Department for Levelling Up Housing and Community, Michael Gove's, or Gove's department. This replaces the MHCLG. Are we content to note?
I'm content to, Chair, but I suppose we would raise the possibility that we, given the preposterously named Department for Levelling Up Housing, DLUC, is now going to be apparently spending money, obviously from my party's perspective, inappropriately overriding or undercutting executive responsibilities but it will be spent. It says it's going to be spending money here, and it is. And we're told with the CRF and the SPF. Why shouldn't we be asking them? I know we didn't have much luck with the Treasury, but should we be contacting them and asking them to give evidence?
Bearing in mind, I think part of the shared prosperity fund is supposed to come in our direction. It is public's monies. I think we should at least ask them if they're willing to come and explain to us how they're going to.
They do, of course, have a permanent secretary who is not a stranger to this committee.
Correct.
Apparently, he's very interested in this place. So.
Coming back for a return trip, we'd be delighted to have Ms. Gray back in front of the committee, but we will ask.
Right to, okay.
Right to, yeah. Unique circumstances funding. The committee has asked to note at page 374 correspondence from the department confirming that there is no plans for spending unique circumstances funding. Are we content to note? Agreed.
Great.
Census consultation. The committee has asked to note at page 377 correspondence from the department including information on a NISRA consultation on the publication of census information. Data on demography, including religion, etc., will be published in autumn of 2022. New reporting variables are reported as including sexual orientation, language proficiency, military veterans, and renewable energy. The consultation deals with other new variables, including education and employment, health and living arrangements, accommodation type, workplace, daytime and out-of-term population. These will also appear, and there will also appear to be changes in reporting geography, including in terms of the super output areas. Would you just like to cover what the suitable output area is and why it's of interest to us?
So certain executive funding streams are determined on the basis of the super output area. So things like full service schools would be determined on statistics which are published from the census and cover things like super output areas. So there's certain schools, Boys Model, North Belfast, which would be right beside a fairly affluent area of North Belfast, but depending on where the super output area is and what the statistics are, could have an impact on their access to those funding. So it'll be something to look out for in 2022 when we see the outcome of the census.
Okay, no content to note. Thank you. Next item on the correspondence under is Code for Special Advisors. The committee is asked to consider at page 428. Just bring that up again. Correspondence from the department relating to revisions to the Code for Special Advisors. The code includes reference to the role of ministers in implying the disciplinary code, including activities likely to lead the public to believe that public funds are being used for political purposes. Bearing in mind last week when we had the head of HR in front of us, and she stated categorically it was up to the minister to decide on the disciplining of the special advisors and the rest of it. I think we should be right to the department to seek clarity as to whether SPADs are subject to the disciplinary code of the NICS or whether this is entirely at the discretion of the minister. I think there is something we need to sort of examine there, and we do need to get clarity on that if we are content. Are we content?
Yep.
Content. Next item is the business plan. The committee is asked to consider at page 440 correspondence from the department, including the interim permanent secretary's remarks for briefing on the business plan, which was deferred from last week. The business plan has very little detail on it, and the briefing, I think, therefore, is sort of questionable value to us with our time. Are we content to cancel the briefing and to simply note the interim permanent secretary's remarks? Noted. Agreed. The chairperson's liaisons group meeting committee priorities. I briefed you on that last week, but the notes on page 443 discussed sort of the volumes of work being considered at the statutory committees. Are we content to note? Noted. Pivotal reports on dealing with education. Is the committee content to note? Noted. LCM query. The committee is asked to consider at page 467 a memo from the Committee on Procedures in respect to the 15 days from standing orders. Present allows for consideration of LCMs. Is the committee content for the clerk to respond indicating the committee's experience is that 15 days is insufficient for proper scrutiny, and I think we have determined that. Great. Next item is the EU Energy Tax Directive. The committee is asked to consider at page 469 correspondence from the House of Lords Committee on European Matters relating to a proposed EU Energy Tax Directive and seeking clarity from the relevant UK Government Minister. The House of Lords Committee asks if the directive will apply to Northern Ireland. It may impact energy costs for households and businesses. Are we content to write to the Minister and seek his commentary on this proposed directive?
Is it one for the finance? Is it one for the Northern Finance? Is the question? I'm not sure it is. I mean, it's a reasonable question for us to ask, but I'm not sure.
I think it's
a reasonable question to be asked. I'm not sure.
I think it's the issue because it's tax, and
he will. I mean, the department will say reasonably that they are not a department responsible for tax. Or I mean, well, I mean, to the extent that there is a department in Northern Ireland responsible for tax, they are,
yeah,
but they're not.
For tax. Yeah.
But are they responsible for?
Well, let's ask them anyhow and see what they get as a response.
I'm not sure what we're asking them, but okay.
Yeah, okay. Just on the other point, I want to realise is that I would encourage members who are interested in sort of all matters, sort of protocol, Brexit, etc. The House of Lords Committee on European Matters has done quite a lot of really good work and pushed out some very good briefing documents that I actually haven't seen anywhere else across government. So I would encourage you to read them as much as you can when you get them. And indeed, we might sort of send a note with the committee's approval and just thank the House of Lords. I'll just get the definitions right. The House of Lords Committee on European Matters, and say thank them for keeping us informed, but also to encourage them to keep us informed as well, and thank them for their diligent efforts so far.
Okay, if that's great.
Because to me, I'm now using that as my ready reference for a lot of the legislation that's coming through, because I can't find it anywhere else, quite frankly.
Is that agreed, members?
Yeah, agreed. Composite requests 474. Are we agreed? Agreed. Forward work programme, draft work programme. It's 486, page 486. The TO was formally advised that the head of civil service will be unable to attend on the 3rd of November, but offers to attend on the 17th of November. Are we content for that? Agreed.
Chair, also the department was just in contact with me before lunch there. If you look on the 10th of November, is it, we were going to have their annual report and accounts. They've asked to push that out a week, and if we can swap it around with the defamation briefing, if members are content to do that.
Why is it?
I think it's going to take them a while. As we were discussing, there are issues with the sign-off of the COVID expenditure during 2021. So this is much later than it ought to be. Usually this would all happen in the summer. It's all a lot later, so they're struggling, I think, with the timescales still. And they're also working on the budget stuff.
Okay. Are we happy?
Agreed.
Okay. Content with the forward work programme? Agreed. Pat, AOB?
Oh, yes, I was just at the start, Chair. I was wondering, has there been, or could we ask to find out if there's been anything in order to help travel agents at the moment that I find that are coming into our offices that are still under the instructions and they're not able to get work as properly as they should be, and I was wondering if there's still any financial assistance out there for them.
Yeah. Okay. Are we content? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, team. And next Wednesday in here at 1400. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is